Let me jump right into it. Whatever happened to the idea of balance? We once praised balanced personalities, and now it is the provocateurs whom the internet mob seems to admire. We used to require balance from journalists, and now we only value outspoken opinion, the angrier the better. We once admired moderate politicians, but now it's the extremists who get the votes. The balanced center of politics, which I used to occupy, is bleeding at the edges, both left and right. Politics itself was once defined in your country and in mine as a search for balance, finding compromises in which each side would get half a loaf. But we now have a politics of enemies, where the goal on every side is a whole loaf or nothing. So in our enraged and divided times, the question is, how did balance fall into disgrace? We could treat this problem as just another part of the decline and fall of liberalism. But there used to be a conservatism that respected balance too. Indeed, our joint commitment to balance maintained the equilibrium of democratic society in your country and mine for 80 years. And now it's gone. So where should we look to restore balance? One place to start, I think, is not to start with politics, but to think about balance being more than a political virtue. It's also a fact of biological life. And a biological fact cannot be jettisoned the way we abandon political convictions. Sooner or later, balance will be restored in nature and in life. The only question is how long it will take and how much damage is done before balance is restored. So let's begin by thinking about balance in our own personal lives. It begins with infancy. When we first lever ourselves up and stand wobbling on our own 2 feet, we experience the exhilaration of finding our balance for the first time. But soon we're cartwheeling across the lawn, hopefully in front of our parents, and after that we're skateboarding, we're skiing, and we're pushing balance to the very edge. It would be wrong to think of balance as a stable equilibrium. The fact about our encounter with balance is we're constantly pushing to the edge of balance. And when we lose balance, we discover our limits. When we gain our balance back, it's when we gain confidence that we can live our lives. When we hit middle age, we struggle to maintain an equilibrium between the competing pressures in our lives, and we begin to associate balance with wisdom, although part of wisdom is to acknowledge the deep, incorrigible fragility of balance. By the time our kids are off our hands and serious old age sets in, we start exercising daily to keep our balance. And our trainers tell us that balance is more than inner ear equilibrium. It's also joints, sinews, muscles, synapses, and nerve endings all working together. It takes a village, as Mrs. Clinton used to say, to keep us upright. And as we age, balance becomes our metaphor for what we value in art and politics and ethics. In this beautiful city, when you appreciate a symphony orchestra playing a great performance, what you're appreciating is the ways in which 120 performers subsume their personalities, submit to the authority of a conductor, and a conductor produces a balanced and equilibrated stream of sound which gives you enormous pleasure. When you're at home putting up a shelf, you use a spirit level. And that little bulb of air stands in the middle, and you get the pleasure, it's a physical pleasure, of knowing that anything you then place on that shelf is not going to move, because balance is going to keep it there. So in private life, balance maintains a key role. It's a key to a happy marriage, as you all know, and as I have learned. And a balance is a key to any understanding we can possibly have with our children and grandchildren. It's when we move to the larger world of geopolitics that we suddenly encounter a world where balance is contested as never before. You all know this quotation, but William Butler Yeats wrote in The Second Coming, composed in the Irish Revolutionary year of 1916, that we've entered one of those revolutionary periods when, quote, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And now we ask in a room like this afternoon, if the best have lost faith in balance, we have a difficult question. Was there a weakness in the ideal of balance itself that we did not see in the calmer consensus politics of the old days before the end of the Cold War? And that this weakness now stands revealed in the harsher, more adversarial political climate of today? Is it possible that the ideal of balance was morally naive, politically innocent, and that a more brutal, antagonistic, and rivalrous world has forced us to free ourselves from a discredited ideal? One of the things that's difficult about our times is that it's difficult to recognize it as being revolutionary. In Western Europe, we're still at peace and we enjoy unprecedented prosperity. I look across a room of very lucky, fortunate people who can hardly believe they're living in revolutionary times. I can hardly believe I'm living in revolutionary times. The other problem we have is that we associate historically revolutions coming from the left, and there's no revolution of the left in sight anywhere. Instead, we're in the midst of something that seems strange and new. In the middle of the most prosperous period in the history of Europe, we're in the midst of a full-blown counter-revolution from the right, directed at the consolidation of the post-war liberal state and against the chief achievement of the post-war liberal state, which was its achievement of an inclusive, multicultural society of mass migration, human and civil rights. That's the internal dynamic of revolution, and you see it particularly in the United States, but it's also in Europe. Externally, the dynamic of revolution is an unprecedented reaction by the reigning hegemon rejecting the price of empire, astonishing development, rejecting the cost of its dollar privilege, rejecting the weight of its alliance commitments. And so when you put the two together, the internal dynamic, the external dynamic, you feel, even though, to use the language of the Bible, even through a glass darkly, we're living through a revolutionary moment in which values like balance are discredited by the times themselves. Now, a counter-revolution from the right is not without historical precedent, as you in this room will know better than most. The great German sociologist Max Weber lived through the dissolution of the stable order of Wilhelmine Germany following defeat in 1918. He lived through the revolutionary upheavals, particularly in Munich afterwards, that led to the collapse of the liberal Republic of Weimar and the consolidation of authoritarian tyranny by 1933. So he lived through a counter-revolution from the right, which had ferocious and terrible consequences, and he saw it at its beginning. In a lecture in Munich in 1919, he contrasted, as you know, the ethics of responsibility with an ethics of conviction. Revolutionary moments, however, favor the ethics of conviction. Passionate intensity seems a surer guide for the frightened and perplexed than balance, especially when the world is turned upside down. At first sight, it may seem alarmist to compare Munich 1919 with, say, Salzburg 2025. Europe is still so prosperous, so secure. War in Ukraine is nearby, but the rest of Europe still remains beneficiaries of 80 years of peace. But the cracks in the pavement beneath our feet are becoming apparent everywhere. Every day brings further evidence of the end of the rules-based international order, the end of the American security guarantee for Europe, the collapse of the open international economy, the decline of the United States, the rise of China, the marginalization of Europe. Centrist parties are losing ground to the far right in Germany, in Holland, in Hungary, in Slovakia, and also in Austria. In such a world, who can possibly still believe in balance? And when we look at the structure of our alliances, we see something that should give us concern. Balance in the NATO alliance used to depend on shared allegiance to common values. For 80 years, Europe and America managed their rivalry and slightly concealed Europe's subservience by proclaiming common adherence to democratic freedom. But when J.D. Vance came to the Munich Security Forum in February, he made ideological allegiance to his own far-right agenda, not democratic values, the test of who would receive American support. AfD in Germany, Wilders in Holland, Orban in Hungary were praised as fellow warriors in the battle for truth, while centrist politicians, Atlanticists, were castigated as contemptible captives of political correctness. The Vice President was also laying down a marker that these exchanges between allies are not balanced negotiations between equals, they are dominance rituals, in which the lead dog heads the pack and the lesser dogs follow obediently behind. I'm a Canadian. It's as painful for me to follow the lead dog as it is for you, but that's what we're looking at, dominance rituals. It's animal behavior we're dealing with here, as opposed to negotiation between respected and equal partners. It was Lenin who said that the essential question in politics can be reduced to whom, who will prevail and who will be crushed. The purpose of politics to a Leninist is to gain power, the more absolute and centralized the better. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we are truly in revolutionary times if an American vice president sounds like Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. This view of politics, you don't need to be reminded, is directly destructive of values that Americans and Europeans once held in common. Liberal democracy, again, you don't need to be reminded, is a balance of power between three branches of government. Democracy, I teach my students in Vienna, is not elective dictatorship. It's an equilibrium of institutions in which power checks power to keep the people free. And Europe is now facing a regime that is contemptuous of a democratic balance that goes back to Madison. This is a regime that believes judicial oversight is frustrating the will of the people, that seeks to bring independent regulatory bodies like the US Federal Reserve under the heel of the executive, that issues executive orders by the president that override, circumvent, or ignore the authority of the legislative branch, the Congress. And the same disdain for balance in the domestic sphere is now characteristic of their handling of the international order created after 1945 and set down in the UN Charter. That order balanced the authority of the most powerful states, who were given vetoes on the Security Council, with countervailing rules designed to protect the sovereignty of the less powerful states. The current American regime has no fundamental interest in an order which balances the powerful to protect the weak. Its fundamental interest is dominance. And the flaw of dominance, we need to remind ourselves, the flaw of dominance is obvious. Those whose power is challenged and who have the means to fight back, and China does come to mind here, will do so. Insecurity will be the inevitable result now that great power balance through the United Nations has been abandoned. So in domestic politics and international politics alike, the ideal of balance confronts a revolutionary regime besotted with the ethics of conviction and determined to remake the world in its own image. And so right now, and you can feel it, the psychological momentum is with the revolutionary. They are experiencing the excitement of vertigo, the cleansing joys of destruction, the exhilaration of going to the edge. Revolutionary excitement lights up the visages of Trump's true believers. There's intoxication in this revolutionary hour that can leave defenders of balance like me looking exhausted, retrograde, and even life-denying. So this is a moment, my friends, if there ever was one, when we should speak up for the virtues of balance. We need to remember, thank you, we need to remember that a balanced person is a responsible one, an adult who understands, as children and adolescents do not, that life requires choice and that wise choice demands self-discipline, keeping your emotions from swaying your head. Balancing choices means being restrained, controlling your impatience for results, your desire for revenge. It means playing a long game, realizing you can't please all the people all the time. Being balanced means taking care to anticipate consequences, calculate risks, and if you can, to protect the innocent from harm. In revolutionary periods, however, conviction overturns responsibility. This global economic hegemon, in the grip of an ideological fixation that America is at the mercy of its allies and partners, has levied tariffs to correct this geostrategic imbalance. In doing so, it has triggered a global market correction, one in April and another soon to come. It then suspends the measures when it sees what the market does, because it has failed to anticipate the reaction. The global economic system on which we all depend is then thrown into semi-permanent disorder because the world's dominant economic power doesn't take the trouble to balance convictions with responsibility for consequences. And this is the stability we lose when the leaders we elect cease to value balance. Overtly, regimes like this one explicitly reject the idea that politics and policy should be a balancing act. This regime believes, on the contrary, that some convictions, whether they call them leftist, liberal, woke, Marxist, are wrong and must be defeated, humiliated, and prevented from rising again. In this mood of crystalline certainty, it becomes a mark of weakness to accept the good faith of people you oppose. And we don't notice the ways in which, in the world we have lost, we took for granted the good faith of people we disagreed with. That is gone. Anyone now who believes, for example, the curious idea that universities and their academic freedom are important to the economic and moral well-being of a society, someone like that is clearly defending elite privilege while covering up anti-Semitism. And such people have to be taught a lesson. using the full force of government. Political regimes that do not accept the legitimacy of plural convictions, who do not accept the good faith of those they disagree with, believe, like Lenin, that there are errors that must be destroyed and certain truths that must prevail at all costs. And such politics explicitly rejects the necessity of accepting that human beings actually disagree about values to uphold and how to best attain and defend them. Ideological enragés dismiss balance as a craven liberal's desire for a quiet life. Now, many liberals, and I'm an old, incorrigible, too late to change liberal and damn proud of it, many liberals themselves have begun to apologize for their own moderation, for their own willingness to compromise. We've even been known to confess that our on the one hand is so finely balanced by our on the other hand that we can't make up our mind about a damn thing. But liberals should stop apologizing. There should be limits to our self-deprecation. In fact, there's a logic to balance that is more than a liberal alibi for indecision. The idea of balance recognizes a stubborn and important fact about human beings, or at least free ones. The fact is, we disagree about ultimate things, whether they are faith, values, or interests. And the challenge of moral judgment in political life is to bring contending values into fragile equilibrium so that our disagreements do not turn murderous. Even when we don't have murder in our hearts towards others, we struggle to reconcile our own values with ourselves. We're at war with ourselves about what to believe and how to act. These value conflicts are why balance is essential. Let me give you two examples. Justice, for example, conflicts with mercy. While the consistent application of legal rules is the essence of justice, equally, rules have exceptions, and a justice that makes no exceptions might not be justice at all, just cruelty. Equality, likewise, is both a condition of liberty but also an enemy of liberty. Constraining the income and opportunities of the comfortable to equalize the opportunities of the less fortunate is justified if the barriers to social ascent deny access to the talented. But equalizing conditions sacrifices some of the liberty of the comfortable. Now, the rights of the comfortable are never a popular cause. I'm talking to a room of comfortable people, and our rights are not a comfortable cause. It's easier to believe that all good things in politics can be had together. The left consoles itself by believing the fiction that liberty and equality can never be in ultimate conflict, just as it consoles the right to believe that liberty can flourish without equality. In fact, wisdom in politics, whether of right or of the left, depends on understanding that not all good things can be had together, and that achieving one goal can only come at the price of some sacrifice of another. Balance is the necessary recognition in politics and in life of moral pluralism, of the fact that people in good faith disagree about the most important and ultimate things in life. And the task of politics is to find some way for us to live together in peace. That's the wisdom that balance is trying to express and capture. And sometimes, however, this is the other point I want to make, sometimes no compromise between values and interests can be found. Isaiah Berlin, whose biographer I am, understood that there are moments when liberal compromise cannot be achieved. As the great Israeli philosopher Avishai Margalit would put it, there are honorable compromises and there are rotten ones. If life and politics present us with circumstances where no honorable balance exists, the path of honor and integrity require us to fight, defend what we believe, seek its vindication. The limits of balance and compromise become cruelly evident in revolutionary times. If you are faced with an opponent who only seeks deals where they come out winners and you come out the loser, who uses power only to get more of it, who equates compromise with weakness and balance with equivocation, there's no politics of balance to practice with that antagonist. It's time to oppose, to resist, to fight. And you fight, in fact, to restore balance, to restore moderation and compromise, and you do so to prevent ideological ruthlessness tipping a society into anarchy or authoritarianism. If the only thing an opponent understands is force, then you have no choice but to display force in the sense of a proud and certain no, to restore balance, to ensure the other side understands once and for all that they cannot achieve their goals except at an unacceptable price. This is not idle abstraction, by the way. My country, Canada, is in the middle of what it hopes is a negotiation with an American president. But there's no certainty that it is a negotiation at all. It may be one of those situations where the gun is placed to the head of a G7 government and told it's either that or the highway. Then what do? That is truly a moment when the politics of balance compromise is over. So this is the world we're in. And resistance becomes necessary when ideologues ignore plain facts and distort obvious realities. The list of these facts and realities grows longer with each passing day. And so, because plain facts are being refused, it becomes obligatory to refuse further concessions or surrenders of principle. There is a small minority of migrants, to take that example, who are criminals and deserve repatriation and jail. But the majority are law-abiding contributors to society and should earn a path to citizenship. Some students in the United States are anti-Semitic, but most are not. And no one deserves their visas withdrawn because of their political views. Tariffs slow global trade, pass costs on to consumers, raise prices, and do not reshore production. Alliances are not free-riding rackets. They're pacts of mutual assistance and deterrence. Putin is an aggressor. Zelensky is defending a free people's right to remain free. Vaccines do not kill people, they save lives. Judges enforce the law, they do not frustrate the will of the people. Canada does not want to become the 51st state. Greenland does not want to belong to the United States. These are plain... When facts as plain as these are repeatedly denied, when the evidence of simple truth is refused, balance, accommodation, compromise, reasonableness, splitting the difference becomes a game of fools. We should always want to restore balance, ladies and gentlemen, but not at the price of being taken for fools. If there is balance in life, there is balance in history. Periods of revolutionary change, for example, 1789 to 1815, were followed in Europe with a long period of restoration and reaction. In the same way, the post-1945 period of grace in which we grew up and came to maturity can now be seen as an 80-year period of recovery from the twin revolutionary explosions of fascism and Nazism. To believe that balance will be restored in the 21st century is to say more than just this too shall pass. It is to believe that balance in politics and life are more than liberal fashions. It is to believe they are deep necessities of biological life itself. For every action, there will be an equal and opposite reaction. If we lose balance on one side, we will regain it by moving to the other side. But this will require a great deal of wisdom, and the wisdom we need is behind us. The liberal challenge is to ride out periods of revolutionary change without succumbing to the temptation of restoration or reaction. We will have to have the wisdom of our liberal forebears, Alexis de Tocqueville, John Stuart Mill, who both came of age in revolutionary times and were wise enough to make peace with a new and unfamiliar democratic order and to craft a vision of institutional balance and political moderation that gave Europe its best eras and can do so again when the revolutionary storm has passed. Thank you.